Good evening, Who Dat Nation, and a happy Wednesday on a Friday to our Bayou Blitz family. We'd like to welcome you all to a special broadcast, a haphazardly put together broadcast of your Bayou Blitz. I am Bob Rose. I am one of your frazzled hosts to your Bayou Blitz podcast. Joining me is my equally frazzled co-host and friend and moving partner, not partner, but moving cohort, Brendan Boylan. Brendan, I know you're not at home tonight, but welcome.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, well, I don't know. Did I have a home this week? When you're moving between places, do you truly have a home? I don't know, but no. I'm in it. I'm close to Atlanta. I'm in Flowery Branch with my parents, close to not too far from Falcons training camp. But everything's been a little, like you said, frazzled. Thankful for this getaway, quote unquote, for my birthday weekend. But we'll
happy birthday weekend. This guy is celebrating his birthday too. We're having a birthday party for him. So if you can break away and make the trek, you're welcome to join us at Chuck E. Cheese. We'll share cake.
Perfect. I'll be up there Monday, so just save me a slice, and I'll get it on Monday.
We'll do.
Yeah, so I guess we'll break that too. We'll have a special short something on Monday. Since Bob and I don't get to actually be together face to face a whole lot, we figured we'd bring you guys a little something. But all that to be said, Bob, it's unlike our lives. It's still been a little bit quiet for the New Orleans Saints this offseason, which is to be expected. And we kind of talked about that last week. The last thing you really want right now is the noise and things surrounding the team, because that typically means you got bad things going on, i.e., the last few years, whether it be Kamara, Lattimore, the list goes on. So we wanted to bring something a little bit more laid back, a little bit more easy. Still some content, still some conversation to be had, but it's nice to not have an off season full of drama. Like it's been a while. It's been a while since that's been the case, and for now, knock on wood, as you like to say, it's one of those things where you just hope it does stay away. But it does mean that there are some Saints that are saying roster bubble might be a little bit of a stretch, but there are some guys that do have a lot on the line. Whether that mean if they don't perform this offseason or into the regular season, they could very well not be around next year. Right? You have guys like Alvin Kamara, who right now is still not in the building. And I see DJ, you just asked a question about that on the live, so we'll definitely get to that as well. But before we jump into any of that, I hope everybody had a safe and enjoyable 4th of July holiday. I was moving. I didn't do anything special. I had maybe like a 30-minute little segment with some of my future in-laws and some nieces and nephews. But other than that, we were pretty boring as we were moving things into the new place. Bob, how was the holiday for you?
Boring as well. My wife Lauren worked. We attempted to order pizza, but the pizza shop near us was closed, so we just had McDonald's. I don't think you get any more American than McDonald's value meals anyway. So that kind of fit along line with what we were doing. We did have people over on Sunday. Nice to get together with friends. So I guess you could say we celebrated then. We're not much of a fireworks family. Watched a little bit from my porch, and just basically went about our daily business.
Sounds like you and I had the same dinner on the 4th, because we were still bringing things in the house. I looked at the clock. I said, "Man, it's like 9 o'clock at night. What's open at 9 o'clock on a Thursday on a holiday?" And I said, "Well, McDonald's is, so get those $5 meal deals. That's actually probably the best value for your money nowadays, anyway." But enough about us. More about the New Orleans Saints. Let's start with Alvin Kamara before we get into which Saints we feel like have the most at stake. Just because that's probably the biggest topic right now. And again, I think Saints fans and the Who Dat Nation should be thankful that that's the biggest topic, because
Mhm.
biggest topic the last few years has been Kamara's court case or Lattimore being arrested up in Ohio. So I will take contract dispute over arrests and court time and all that stuff any day of the week. The latest is we don't really have anything. That's kind of the latest. So this is the part of the show where Bob and I would typically go back and forth and talk about, well, this is what we expect, and this is what da 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 da. At the end of the day, this is what it breaks down to. And Bob, if we're being repetitive over the last few weeks, this is what it is. Kamara has, in his last year of his deal, is like $25 million against the cap. But if I understand the way that the contract works correctly, because believe it or not, neither Bob nor I are attorneys, draft contracts, or really fully understand contracts sometimes, because some of these things are really weird. But because of the way the Saints do business, that $25 million is like not fully guaranteed the last year. So ultimately, the Saints are not going to want to pay Kamara $25 million in that last year of his contract. Well, Kamara does want some guaranteed money. So that's where the holdup is how can we get to a point where Kamara is getting paid? The Saints retain a guy who, is on pace to become the franchise leader in just about every rushing category. How do we get everybody happy? And I think for me, the easiest thing, and it's a lot easier said than done, right, is restructuring a new 2-year contract with guaranteed money. Whatever Kamara and his team feels is the right number for them. Clearly, the Saints are not on the same wavelength of that number. Now, I'm not going to sit here and speculate how much money they're off. And frankly, I hate that type of reporting anyway, because if you're off $1 million or you're off $10 million, guess what? You're still off. You're still not happy. So what difference does it make, whether you're $1 million off or $10 million off? And the fan and everybody would say, well, at least they're closer. Like, you're giving us a little bit more information. Great. But to me, it's like a contract's still not a contract. So I don't know where Kamara's team is. I don't know where New Orleans is. It's a continuing, ongoing process, and that's kind of where it stands right now. But Bob, outside of kind of my thoughts on a 2-year rework, if you will, where do you feel about what that contract should look like for Alvin Kamara?
First of all, you're right. Neither you or I are attorneys, which is kind of a shame, for me personally these days. Though I will be talking to one, on a personal note. But we'll be talking more to one on a personal note. But it wouldn't be about Kamara's situation. I'm sorry, Alvin, I can't help you out. I got my own situation. But in any case, you're right. It's Alvin Kamara has made it pretty clear, at least publicly, that he loves New Orleans. He wants to remain a Saint, and I don't see any reason not to take him at his word, because his actions certainly back that up. The other important detail about Kamara's existing contract, is you're 100% accurate in that, he's the way it's structured now, he would cost over $25 million against the Saints salary cap next year, but not a cent of that is guaranteed. That's where the hangup is. But the other caveat to his contract is because of prior restructures, there are 2 voided years already added on to Alvin Kamara's contract in 2026, 2027. Now, in 2026, he would become an unrestricted free agent. But as we've seen with previous Saints in recent past, those voided years, when you kick that can down the road, those voided years still cost money against the cap, albeit a smaller amount, even if the player is no longer on your team. whether it's a retired Drew Brees, whether it's a David Onyemata, Marcus Davenport, who signed elsewhere, just situations like that. But in this case, I believe that those voided years can and probably will work in the Saints' favor, because at the end of the day, I don't believe Alvin Kamara is going anywhere. But I also don't believe that Alvin Kamara is going to report until he gets that new deal. The new deal is just a matter of finances, because with those 2 voided years, the Saints management team can easily, whatever financial figure that the 2 parties settle on, which is going to be all about guaranteed money. And my suggestion, folks, if you want to speculate the spectrum where Alvin Kamara's guaranteed money comes in, look up Christian McCaffrey's recently signed deal. Look up Josh Jacobs' deal that he signed with the Green Bay Packers this offseason and free agency. The number is going to be somewhere in between those. It's not going to be, I don't see it being significantly greater than what Jacobs' deal is, but I don't see it being equal to what McCaffrey got, just because even though I would take Alvin Kamara over Christian McCaffrey in my offense, the numbers don't work in Alvin's favor, the statistics, that is. Granted, that's mostly the Saints and Pete Carmichael's fault, but the numbers still are the numbers at the end of the day. So that's what I would do, fans, if you want to kind of speculate on your own what Alvin Kamara's final number is going to approach. Look between McCaffrey's deal and what Josh Jacobs got. Now, whatever that figure is, the Saints are going to be able to spread it out between not only next season, but even into 2026, or even perhaps even 2027 if they so choose. So, the contract is structured, if you'll forgive the term, the contract is structured for a negotiation. All the 2 parties have to do now is settle on what exact financial number makes the player happy. And I still believe that gets done, if not before training camp, then very, very shortly into camp, which I believe the first day of camp is July 26th. So that's the number that we're looking at for the date that we're looking at for Kamara right now.
And that's the latest on the Alvin Kamara situation. Let's jump into Saints that have the most at stake this offseason. This is an interesting topic because interpretation of that question, what's at stake, the way that I interpret that is going to be very different from the way Bob interprets it. It's going to be very different from the way that you guys listening, watching, are going to interpret it as well. Before we jump into that, hello to everybody here in the live chat. I see Sonny from Facebook, DJ's here, Jerry, per usual, is here, Blaze, thanks for joining us as well. So, Bob, when I read this question, personally, which Saint has the most at stake, I'm thinking about guys who are playing for their starting job for the most part. I think the only fair way to go about this, to get some differing opinions, is we both select a player from each side of the football, or special teams. Special teams are people too.
Sort of.
At least on this show. Well, we had the punters are people too for a little bit. We had that debate with the guys in Vegas. Kicking is for losers. So I guess for us, it's whatever day of the week it is, depends whether or not special teamers are people. So for today's purpose and for today's episode, we'll say the special teams, they are indeed people today. At the time of the recording and or the time of people viewing or listening on their various podcast networks after the fact. So for me, Bob, starting on offense, the player that I feel has the most at stake, I think this is an easy one.
See, and before you say it, and I might throw a monkey wrench into your answer, and I think most of the fans, and I'm sure the comments are going to come flooding in a minute too. Obviously, Dennis Allen has a great deal at stake this year. just as obviously, Derek Carr has a great deal at stake this year. I'm going to be right. I wrote about Dennis Allen and history working against him. I think it was yesterday. So if you want to check out that article, if you haven't already, just click onto my profile, either on Facebook or Twitter. You'll find it on my page. And I'm going to be writing about what Derek Carr has at stake this year. What could happen, worst case scenario, if he has a poor season. What could happen if he has a good season. So I think it goes without saying that coach and quarterback, after what we saw from this team last year, have a great deal at stake. So you may or may not want to change your answer, but to me, the obvious answers are Dennis Allen and Derek Carr. So my answers, therefore, I'm going to take them off the table so that way we can have a little bit more of a debate, because those two are just obvious to me.
I'm glad you said that. And I actually wasn't going that way. So it kind of worked out. But thank you for putting that addendum into our rules and regulations. Maybe you are more of a lawyer than you think you are, Bob. How about that? But for me, it's Trevor Penning. I think it's the easiest answer to go to. I will have my honorable mention, which we might be actually dive into a little bit deeper, because you may not agree with this one, but I think Jawan Johnson has a lot at stake as well. But Trevor Penning is my number one answer for this. And like I said, I mean, it kind of makes sense. And I have been one of the few people, I think, in local media that has shown a little bit more support for Penning.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily because of his play, but because he started like 7 games.
Yeah.
And I am completely, and this is a rant for another time, but we'll get some of it out off my chest now. I hate the way that modern sports are with young people. Because 20 years ago, you drafted a guy and you let him play out that 5-year contract and hope they develop. And some of those guys didn't really develop or hit until years 4 and 5. Nowadays, if you don't hit in the first 2 years, it's like, bust, let's trade them. Now, quarterbacks, I can understand a little bit more. But man, you're drafting kids that are 21 years old in the NFL, and you expect them to get it all right by the time they're 23. Like, that's crazy. And don't even get me started on the NBA with guys drafting guys at 18 years old, and they're getting cut before their 21st birthday. Like, it's absolutely insane. I hate that. But this is what it boils down to for Trevor Penning is he knows he's on a short leash. He knows that he knows the level of expectation, because New Orleans does have an opportunity here to win the NFC South. I think the level of expectation is higher because his fellow first-round draft pick in that class, Chris Olave, is already making strides and proving that he is going to be one of the top receivers in football.
Mm-hmm.
If he continues, ascending at the rate that he is. The other thing is the fact that right now, like the Saints drafted a tackle in the first round too. Now, some of that has to do with Ryan Ramczyk. Some of that has to do with the fact that Trevor Penning has yet to really pan out for New Orleans, and the fact that Andrews Pete's not coming back. So there's a lot of factors in that. But this is an offseason where he has to prove he's taking steps. This is an offseason where he has to – when I say offseason, I'm including the preseason in that, folks. Like, from camp all the way through the preseason, like, Trevor Penning's got to show not just us in the media, not just you guys, the fans, but really the coaching staff and management that, hey, like, look, I have made strides. I have worked my tail off. These are the things I'm doing. It's not going to be perfect, right? Like, we're not going to just magically wake up and Trevor Penning be like an all-pro tackle. But we need a guy who's competent enough and good enough to put in front of Derek Carr and give you some production. And I'm saying some production. I'm just saying he has to be better than benchable, right?
Yeah.
That's the ceiling that he's given so far, is being a benchable tackle.
Man, that's a T-shirt in the making. Better than benchable.
Better than benchable. Hey, write it down. Write it down somewhere. I'll put it in my notes on my phone while you go through yours. But your thoughts on my thoughts on Trevor Penning being the offensive player with the most at stake, and then your offensive player with the most at stake.
Boy, I'll tell you, that's a good one. And I think, aside from Carr, I think that's very logical. Penning, I'm with you. Now, I've been harsh on Penning because of his play, but unlike a lot of Saints fans, I am not ready to give up on Trevor just yet. It's the Saints aren't ready to give up on Trevor just yet. They can't. They need him because whether or not you drafted Talise Fuaga, and you ultimately did, you're still without Ryan Ramczyk. Andrus Peat left, which means at tackle you have Landon Young returning, and we've already seen what you get from Young, a moderately serviceable player in short bursts at best. That's too long to put on a t-shirt. And there we go. If it's too long to put on a t-shirt, you can't rely on him. That'll be our philosophy from here on out.
If how we describe you is longer than what we could put on a t-shirt, that's interesting. So wait, hold on. I gotta pause our topic to talk about something that is silly and pointless. So better than benchable, we can put on a t-shirt. Taking is for losers, we can put on a t-shirt. But whatever you said, essentially spotty, serviceable starter.
Moderately serviceable in short doses.
They're spurts, yeah. I guess.
In short spurts, yeah.
Yeah, that is a little too much. We're gonna have to keep that in mind for the rest of the season. Somebody in the chat, Jason, I see you in the chat too. You guys, somebody keep us to that.
Yeah.
And trust me, I now have a notes section of my phone of Bayou Blitz t-shirt ideas. So better than benchable will absolutely be a t-shirt. Because you can use that for multiple aspects of life, not just playing left tackle in the NFL. But with that, Bob, I hit the unpause button and you may continue.
But yeah, so the Saints have no choice but to go back to Penning. And they weren't going to move on from him anyway. You don't trade picks to draft the guy in the first round to give up on him after 2 years. 2 calendar years, but only 7 starts. Now, I think it is a huge red flag against Trevor, the fact that your offensive line in general was so bad last year that you still got benched and only saw 13 snaps over the final 11 games. That's an indictment. And now you get moved over to the right side where a lot of people feel that's better suited to his skill set. He is not going to see as many speed rushers, not going to be as athletically overmatched as often out there. And we know that the Saints, at least throughout Ramczyk's career, we know that the Saints prefer to run over the right side anyway. I don't know if Clint Kubiak's going to be any different or not, but we shall see. I think Trevor Penning is a good choice, and probably I'm not going to go the same player just for the sake of having other topics to discuss. I think next to Derek Carr, it's pretty obvious that Trevor Penning has the most at stake, as a player, and probably the biggest question mark on the entire offensive unit coming into this season.
Let's talk Derek Carr. I do want to get back to Juwan Johnson too, but
I got to give you my pick eventually too. But yeah,
let's get your pick.
Okay. My pick's going to be somewhat of a surprise. You mentioned Juwan Johnson as an honorable mention. Kamara obviously has a lot at stake, as the Saints do by gambling, assuming that they're going to sign him to a contract. But my honorable mention is Kendre Miller. I think Kendre Miller is going to be a great fit in this offense. We saw flashes from him last year, but he wasn't on the field enough because of health reasons, to really show what he could do consistently. So I'm going Kendre Miller is going to be a player I'm going to be watching very closely this year. But my player with the most at stake is actually Trevor Penning's first round classmate, a couple years ago, Chris Olave. It's not because of Chris Olave's play. Unlike Penning, Chris Olave has been a good to very good receiver, probably tilting strongly towards the very good. It's the consistency with Chris that has concerned me. Especially through the first half of last year, him and Derek Carr clearly were not on the same page. And we that was a show topic of us for several weeks going, in the first half of last year's campaign. Olave is capable of making circus catches. Olave, just like Rashid Shaheed, greater in Shaheed's case, but neither receiver was used to the best of their abilities by Pete Carmichael. And this is not a trash on Pete session. It was just fact. Chris Olave is a very good route runner. He has great speed. He's not going to be the physical kind of guy that Michael Thomas was to dominate those intermediate zones, but he can get separation in the middle areas of the field. He can be a guy that moves the chains just as much as he can be a guy that takes the top off of defense. And I want to see Chris Olave be utilized more on all three levels against the defense: short, intermediate, and obviously deep. And I think Clint Kubiak's going to do that. The reason why Chris Olave has the most at stake for me, aside from Carr and Penning, is he's playing for money. We see all these receivers, including younger receivers about Chris's age, or within a year or two, they're getting these big extensions now, and we've seen huge free agent deals for wide receivers in the last couple of off seasons. So really, it's starting to become clear that just like with the quarterback position, you don't want to spend a big money on a guy that's just going to be another guy. You want to spend money on a guy that's going to be dominant. And if he's not going to be dominant, then teams are going to start to move on from these first-round pick receivers and just draft another one in the first round. Exactly what we've been seeing with quarterbacks lately. Chris Olave is starting to fall into that situation. He's coming into year 3. Michael Thomas is not going to be around anymore. So, the distraction part of the offense is now gone. Is Chris going to become a diva, demanding the ball, pouting if he doesn't get it? Or is he going to become a guy that's going to be reliable week in and week out? And that's an important question for Chris Olave to answer, not necessarily to the fans, but to the Saints coaches and management. Because after year 3, before you go into year 4, that's when a team has to make their decision whether they're going to pick up a rookie first-round picks, 5th-round option or not. So again, you're talking a lot of money here. Potential contract extension this offseason for Chris. Otherwise, he's going to be in that kind of contract limbo going into year 4. I think that Chris Olave has the abilities to be an elite wide receiver. Now all he has to do is take that next step up and do it.
I hadn't thought about it that way, but I think it's an interesting point that you bring up, especially with that making the leap, that last little bit that you said there. It's a big off season for him because he is truly the number one guy. And say what you will about last year. He was the number one guy for a majority of last year.
Yeah.
But you still had Michael Thomas lurking around in the wings, who had his history with the Saints. I mean, very clear and obvious he's not the receiver he was, but had this storybook history. Was the offensive player of the year, has the all-time record for receptions in a single season, right? But now it's like, well, Chris, you're the guy. So how are you going to respond to it? So I do think that's an interesting point. Maybe we pin the Juwan talk for next week because we still have defense to get to, and I do think that is a topic that. And maybe I'm just hyping myself up a little too bit, but I think it's a position that not enough people are looking at and going, you know what? Like maybe there is a little bit of a lack of something. Because last year it was, Foster Moreau, Jimmy Graham. We don't know what's going on with Jimmy yet. Foster's a nice piece, but and then you have Juwan who missed a lot of last year, and we all expected Juwan to make that jump last year. So that's something we'll stick a needle in it. We'll pin it. Maybe that's what we do on Monday. That's what we're going to do on Monday. We'll do a short 20-minute show because we're going to be in person together. We'll just do a short live thing on our thoughts on Juwan Johnson for next year. Let's talk about Derek Carr. obvious, right? Obvious why we're going to be talking about Derek Carr. Performance base, it's obvious. Contract base, it's even more obvious.
Mm-hmm.
Because if Derek Carr comes out and lays an egg like he did the first half of the season last year, well, the Saints can really easily move off of his contract following this upcoming season. And the Saints actually have a good problem where you have two young quarterbacks, and Jake Haener and Spencer Rattler, that could battle it out to be the starter. And I'm hearing good things about Haener so far in camp. Rattler's been a little bit more rattled, if you will, and showing signs of just being a rookie, right? Making that jump, which is fine. It happens. I still really like Spencer Rattler. You guys have that. You guys who are consistent here have that on record. I really like the prospect that Spencer Rattler is. But there are a lot of prospects that I like that never pan out. There are a handful of prospects.
Fifth-round pick for a reason.
Right. And there's a handful of prospects you and I, Bob, both have had where we've really liked a guy, and they've been pretty darn good in the league, right? That's why they're a prospect. That's why they're a day 3 pick. But yeah, Derek Carr, really easy contract to move off of. I feel like I've said this a million times since the season's ended, Bob, but I'll say it for the millionth and first, is that Derek Carr was pretty darn good over maybe the last 7-8 games. And when I say good, showing us more of the Derek Carr that New Orleans thought they were getting.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I'm not talking a guy who's going to blow you away and be an all-pro, but a guy who is smart with the football, didn't throw a whole lot of interceptions over those last 8 weeks of the season. A guy that did enough to put you in positions to win football games. I've said it before this offseason too. I think that the expectation for Carr was Mount Everest, right? Because he's the first true quarterback, if you will, to be the heir apparent to Drew Brees. I think those are massive shoes to jump into. You guys can make your argument about Jameis. You guys also know how I felt about Jameis. But with the injuries and everything, I don't think Jameis ever was truly put in a position to be the quote-unquote heir apparent. And then the whole got brought in by Sean, but was not Dennis's guy, and that was a whole tricky thing too.
Yeah.
Derek's like the guy, has the support of the GM, the coaches, everybody. I thought he was really good over the back half of the year. If that continues into a new system, that's scary too, considering the hiccups, the uh-ohs early in the year in a new system. You're going to have to do that all over again. And you hope that this is more simplified for Carr and it's not as difficult and something picks up really early. But you have that little voice in the back of your head that goes, we've already been through this once. Right? And the problem with last year wasn't so much the hiccups early in the year, right? And rule of thumb is those first 4 weeks are like an extension of the preseason, especially when you're a quarterback in a new system, right? So, but after week 4, you should see maybe not a massive jump, but you should see the play become easier. Everything should quote unquote slow down for the quarterback at that point. The problem that we had was what should have been 4 weeks of okay, like I get it, he's getting used to the offense, became about 8 weeks.
Yeah.
And that's where the concern is for Derek Carr and a Clint Kubiak system. Now, Kubiak's system is brilliant. It should sound like a well-orchestrated symphony on paper with some of the weapons and the offensive tools that they have. But that's why Bob and I's favorite saying on the show is on paper, which is another T-shirt idea. But on paper, this should work. But again, you have that little whisper in the back of your head that goes, but we've been through this before. Bob, I actually have a decent amount of faith that Derek Carr is going to be, let's say, above the Andy Dalton line next year. But I still have that creeping doubt. Where do you stand on all that?
I like Carr's fit in this system. I think Clint Kubiak's system, or at least what we think it's going to be, it's predicated on establishing the run, using a lot of play action, having the quarterback get rid of the ball quickly, oftentimes on the move, moving pockets, rollouts, half rollouts, etc. While Derek Carr isn't gonna confuse anybody with the Lamar Jackson. He's not going to be confused with Lamar Jackson athletically anytime soon. Derek has showed even last year with last year's struggles, he could throw on the move. And I'm not defending Derek Carr by any stretch. His play over the first 6, 8, 10 games of last season. But for the people that said, "Oh, he was just padding his stats," that was part of it for a couple of games. But he was also sharp down the stretch when defenses were expecting the pass too. There's something to be said for that. He was without Alvin Kamara for the first month of the season. He played behind an awful offensive line. He had the distraction, aka Michael Thomas, in that locker room. He and Chris Olave weren't getting along. And yeah, you make a great point, Brendan, about now Carr's going to have to learn a system all over again, a new system all over again. But unlike last year, Derek Carr came into a new system last year, one that he didn't know, but all of his teammates did. This system, at least what we're hearing is it is very simplified terminology, adjustments, reads, etc. It's very simplified compared to what Pete Carmichael and certainly Sean Payton before that had. B, Carr is learning this system along with all of his teammates. So while there is still a learning curve here for the offense itself, they're all learning it together. Believe it or not, that can kind of promote camaraderie a little bit, because now you're studying together, you're asking each other questions, you're helping each other understand instead of trying to learn from the guys that have already been there. I think that's a missing piece that a lot of people don't realize. Again, I don't expect Derek Carr to be elite. He hasn't throughout his NFL career, but even if he gives the Saints good play, well above average play, this has the talent, in my opinion, to be a playoff team, certainly a division winner, in what we think is going to be the NFC South. As I've said several times, about Derek Carr, and I agree with you. Jameis Winston was not the guy that replaced Drew Brees. He was given the starting job, but he wasn't the anointed replacement. And it certainly wasn't Trevor Siemian or Andy Dalton. And I've always said, you don't want to be the guy that replaces the legend. You don't want to be the Brian Griese to the John Elway or whoever the hell it was after Dan Marino, or Doug Flutie after Jim Kelly. I could go on, but you get my point. You don't want to be the Danny White after Roger Staubach. Danny White was pretty damn good, but is vilified to this day by older Cowboys fans. So you don't want to be the guy who replaces the legend. You'd rather be the guy replacing the replacement of the legend. And that's where Derek Carr is staring down the barrels of the shotgun, because he's that guy replacing the legend. He's the guy handpicked by Dennis Allen to essentially replace Drew Brees and take this team back to a perennial playoff contender. You're being asked to replace a legendary NFL great. And you don't have the talent that NFL great had, certainly not up front. So, Derek Carr is under pressure for so many reasons, because like you said, if he plays poorly, and the team plays poorly, and I think the two are probably linked, you're probably going to see a good chance anyway. You're going to see both Carr and Allen out of New Orleans, which means the Saints are then going to be pegged for drafting a first-round quarterback next year. So Derek Carr, quite simply, is playing for his NFL life.
I want to jump back to what you're talking about with the potential camaraderie in learning a system together. And I hope that doesn't get overlooked. And I'm sure it's something we'll talk about more, not just through the offseason, but as the year progresses as well. Because you're right, it is really different when you come into a system and you have guys that were in the system the year prior with multiple other quarterbacks, right? Because Chris could easily come back to the huddle and the ball be, thrown, over one shoulder opposed to the other, and Derek be like, "What the hell, man? Like I put it in your spot," and then Chris comes back and be like, "Well, Jameis put it in this spot,"
Right.
or he comes back and be like, "Well, Andy put it in this spot." So how about you do what Andy and Jameis were doing and put it in the spot where it's supposed to go? And like that causes things too when it's a situation where you don't even realize that you're trying to fit someone into the mold of who was there before. Right? It's like a subconscious thing that you don't even realize and being like, well, Derek's not doing it right. And it's like, well, Derek's putting his own spin and flair on this when you're just used to the last 2 years of Andy Dalton, Jameis Winston, Trevor Siemian, Ian Book, Taysom Hill, the list goes on, right?
Yeah, and by the way, if you're Chris Olave and you come back at me, saying, well, Jameis, threw it this way, or Andy threw it that way, and I'm Derek Carr, I'm liable to respond with, well, I was brought in as a better option to Jameis and Andy, so you're going to do it my way. Now we're just speculating on the whatever minor rift, was occurring between Derek Carr and his receivers. But that is the kind of thing that can happen between competitors.
Right, and it's not just Chris Olave. Like it could be literally anybody on the roster that we're talking about, where you subconsciously go, well, he didn't put it in the right spot. Like, subconsciously in your head, you're like, oh, I didn't do anything wrong. He did it wrong. He wasn't here. So now you're learning it together, and with that comes Derek and his receivers, or Derek and his running backs, Derek and his offensive line going, okay, well, like on this play, or when we do this is what I'm thinking. Like, how do you feel about that? And while you're going through these installs, you're making minor tweaks to the plays and in these installs and going, okay, well, on this play, if you get this look, scrap that. I want you to do this, right? Without even having to audible or communicate, right?
Yep.
Because in those situations when you've installed it together and you've learned it together, all Chris and Derek have to do is look at each other and be like, okay, well, I'm seeing cover 3. If it is truly cover 3 opposed to running that, post route, how about you don't post and you come back on a hitch and I throw it over your outside shoulder and you toe drag and we're done, or whatever it is, right? Simple. But those things don't happen when Olave was in a system, or Rashid Shaheed was in a system, or Juwan Johnson was in a system that had other things installed prior.
Yep.
So, yeah, I think that is a good point that we shouldn't overlook. Quick, Bob, last few minutes here. Let's talk about defense and guys that have the most at stake. I think for me it's interesting because you could pick a lot of different guys because of age, right? Some older veteran dudes. You could pick a couple guys because of contract situations. And you could pick some guys that you just really expect to step it up, this upcoming season. So for me, while I recognize that there are options on the defensive line, linebackers, secondary, like literally every level, I think you could have a very good case to pick somebody. I'm going with the guy who got extended last year. The guy who got extended and then disappeared. And that's Carl Granderson. And here's why. He had a hell of a start to the year.
Yep.
Hell of a start to the year. And then, just like Avatar The Last Airbender, when the world needed him most, he vanished. We didn't see a whole lot of sack production out of Carl Granderson after that extension got signed, did we? And this is less of me calling him out for that and more of me going, the reasons why we saw some of that, inconsistent play from the defensive tackles, right, outside of Brisset. And you could even throw Brisset in there because he's a rookie. It's what you're going to get.
Mm-hmm.
The sharp decline of Cameron Jordan. I know that's going to hurt people to hear that, but it's the fact. It is a sharp decline. I do think that he's a guy who could probably get to like 5 or 6 sacks next year, but I don't think you're going to see Cameron Jordan be the guy who is getting 12, 13 sacks again. I just don't. And that's age, right? And he's been in the league for a long time and has played a hell of a lot of football games during that time frame too. You're not talking about a guy who was like benched for the first couple years, right? Like outside of that rookie year, he has played every game but one or every game but two, something like that. So this is why I'm saying Carl Granderson has the most at stake. He just got paid. Your running mate on the other side, slowly declining. This defense is really looking at you, especially where he lines up over the left tackle a lot of the times. They need that sack production, that pressures on the quarterback from Carl Granderson to take some pressure off of Cam on the other side, to take some pressure off of those defensive tackles to get to the quarterback as well, because, that was the weakness of this team. I thought the defensive tackles did an okay job against the run. I thought applying pressure in the middle wasn't all there last year. So that's why I'm going to take Carl Granderson. I think it's a ballsy one, but I do feel like there's a lot at stake for him to show his worth to the money he just got and be like the next guy up. And I think I say that with a lot of respect because I remember when Carl Granderson came into the system and a lot of guys were like, it's just another like late round pick. And, you, myself, a handful of guys at Saints News were like, this guy's showing out. Like, he's going to make the roster. And then after he made the roster, I was like, we got to kind of watch out for this guy. Like, he might not just make the roster. Like, he might have an impact on this team. And then he had a couple years there where it was like, okay, we're starting to see some. And then he started to break out. You
and I have been covering the draft for quite some time. Although I don't think we covered it together in 2018, 2019. I know we worked together, and I know you remember me saying, I love what I saw from Carl Granderson at Wyoming, and if it wasn't for that domestic battery case that he was on trial for, he's a day 2 pick. He was that talented. So, all of us agreed on staff at the time. Carl's not only going to make this team, which he obviously easily did, but he's going to have at least some level of impact. And we've seen that impact increase, at least statistically, each year. Now, and this is why you surprised me more than a little bit with by picking Granderson. Granderson did plateau last year and then go into a bit of a valley production wise. I'm glad that you said that it wasn't necessarily all him though, that he didn't have any help up there. Demario Davis wasn't getting home as a blitzer. The defensive tackles, Bresee has a bright future. I'm convinced that this kid is a potential perennial, Pro Bowler. But a rookie defensive tackle, they're going to hit a wall. And when Brian Bresee hit a wall, Carl Granderson's production also hit a wall because teams realized on the other side, as you pointed out, you know what? We don't have to double team, triple team 94 anymore because Cam Jordan isn't quite what he was. Now, maybe that's because of injury. Maybe that's because of age. I'm more likely to believe that it's a combination of the two. But regardless, once teams realize we don't have to double team Cam anymore, we could throw some double teams. We could clog the middle. We could throw some double teams on the other side with Granderson. I think that only showed what Carl Granderson is, and that is a very good defender. Who can contribute, make good contributions in a system, but isn't good enough to be the guy. And since he's not good enough to be the guy, and Cam might no longer be the guy, the defensive the guy for me is Granderson has his money. He just got extended. Chase Young is now playing for money and playing for an extension, because even when the Saints brought him in, and some fans were really excited, some fans, some people like myself were like, we'll see. He has the potential, but he's never really shown it consistently. And the reason, that's the reason why he's only signed to a 1-year deal by the Saints, is because he hasn't shown it consistently. If Chase Young can show why he was the number 2 overall pick in 2020, Now Chase Young is looking at a big contract number after the season, whether it's with New Orleans or another team that's irrelevant for this discussion's purposes. The Saints did not draft an edge rusher. The Saints did not sign an edge rusher outside of Young in free agency when they had the opportunities to do so. We talked about Cam. We know Peyton Turner, we assume Peyton Turner is just going to get hurt at this point. Let's be honest. And I still have high hopes for Isaiah Foskey, but he hasn't shown anything yet. So, and by the way, I think Foskey has a lot on the line this year too. But Chase Young, to me, is the one defensive player above all others, because I also believe Marshawn Lattimore and Paulson Adebo tied. Those two are going to be playing to see whichever one is better is the guy that's going to be the cornerback retained by New Orleans next season. Again, that's another story for itself in itself. But Chase Young trumps them too, because the Saints need Chase Young to be that second overall pick from 2020 to show those abilities, to prove that he might be the heir apparent to Cam Jordan if they could re-sign him long term. Maybe he is the guy that everybody thought he was coming out of Ohio State. So Chase, the Saints don't have a lot of money tied up in Chase Young, but they have a lot of hope tied up in Chase Young. And because of that, Chase Young is my guy under the biggest microscope on the defensive side.
It's the hope that kills you.
Always.
As a TV show once said. Interesting. We both go defensive end, just completely different directions. I think for similar reasons, though, right? Like you're saying, well, Chase Young has a lot to prove because is he the guy? And I'm saying, well, Granderson's got a lot to prove because he just got paid. So is he the guy to replace Cameron Jordan? So interesting. Very interesting. We'll have more discussions like this.
I mean, you're talking about a team, and Saints team that perennially caused a lot of disruption between 2017 and 2022. And then only had 34 sacks last year. Only 3 teams had less. That's not a Dennis Allen defense, and that's not the way you win football games.
Absolutely not. You got to put pressure on the quarterback. You got to turn the ball over, and I think those are 2 things the Saints really missed last year. I will give props where props are due for certain guys that made plays, and one guy that we were really hard on at the beginning of the year last year was Tyrann Mathieu, but he turned it around and had those honey badger moments where forced turnovers. He made plays, and that's what we wanted to see. So hopefully we see a little bit more of that veteran leadership out of him, obviously out of Demario Davis, to keep this defense in check early and try to get them back to being a top 10 defense in football. But Bob, we're going to have a lot more conversations like this throughout the offseason. Like I said, Monday, we're going to have a little bit of a show talking about, Juwan Johnson and maybe the tight end room as a whole, because I feel, at least, it is a hole that is not being spoke enough about, and hole might not even be the right word. Maybe a question mark is a better way to say that. That is not being spoken enough about in the local media. But with that, Bob, you even with your crazy life and the holiday schedule and everything else going on, you are still being productive. You are still putting out content regarding the New Orleans Saints. Okay, well, look, if you're not being productive with the New Orleans Saints, you're being productive being a good father or something, right? I'm trying to make you sound good, Bob. I'm trying to hype you up. I'm trying to make it sound like you're the man, which you are. No questions on our side, right? Like defensively, the Saints got questions. Who's the guy? But I got the guy on the other side of the screen.
Thank you,
Bob Rose. Bob, where can people follow you and all of your work throughout the offseason as we inch closer and closer to training camp?
Folks, first of all, Brendan and I both appreciate y'all tuning in with us. Those of you that are with us for the live chat, it has been a crazy schedule this week. We do promise that we're going to get back to a level of consistency for you and for us too, for our own sanity. But thank you for tuning in with us on the Friday night live chat. If if you missed the live chat and you're grabbing a view after the fact, we thank you for that. Hopefully it's a little bit easier now that we have this new forum. Let us know if there's anything going forward that we could do to make your listening and your viewing more easier. I don't know which it is. We'll go more easier. How about that?
More easier. How about that?
More easier. But yeah, I mean, I'm going to continue to write throughout the off season, leading up into training camp, and you can follow all of my pieces. I post them on my personal pages: Facebook Bob Rose and Twitter @BobbyR2613. And make sure y'all go to our Bayou Blitz Facebook page and Bayou Blitz Twitter page @BayouBlitzPod. You give us a follow on both pages there. If it's on Twitter, y'all know we follow back. And as always, let us know what we can do to make your show more productive and more fun for you.
I echo that. Thank you guys for tuning in here live. Like Bob said, if you're catching it on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your pods, we appreciate the support as we continue this new adventure with the Minute Media Podcast Network. Really thankful to them for the opportunity to expand the Bayou Blitz podcast to a whole nother group, a whole nother region, if you will, of not just Saints fans, but NFL fans as well. For me, you can follow me on virtually everything at BT Boylan. As you guys like to know, I like to take some time here to put some personal shout outs into the world. So first and foremost to a friend, a guy that has hosted podcasts with me in the past and goes all the way back to running the board for NCAA football on the radio back in the day. I wanted to give a shout out to Thomas Manning, who, with the help of me and some other people, have an official selections for the Reel to Reel Film Festival, which will be taking place here at the end of July. It's his first year being the director of the festival, along with being the youngest member of the Critics' Choice Awards Association. So he's doing some big things. We're excited for everything going on with the festival here at the end of the month. Also, not Saints related, not even New Orleans related, but I wanted to give a shout out to a guy who I have some mutual friends with and four-time NBA All-Star, Kemba Walker, on his retirement from the game of basketball. Was always great when I got to link up with him here in the city of Charlotte. But he treated his friends so well throughout all of the years. So congratulations to him on his retirement from the NBA. But that is all the time we have for the Bayou Blitz podcast. Until next week, hopefully a little bit more normal schedule for all the people that catch us live. Bob and I will be back next week for you folks tuning in through your favorite podcast platforms. We thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you again next week for another episode of the Bayou Blitz podcast. Until then, find some peace, spread love, practice positivity. See you then.